Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
My guest this week is Paul Shapiro, the CEO of the Better Meat Company, a Sacramento-based sustainable food tech startup founded in 2018. Paul is best known in both industry and animal rights circles as the man that was the catalyst that encouraged consumers to drive the food industry into cage-free nation, more practical, humane practices in pork, beef, dairy, poultry, and veal. He also was the visionary catalyst of the clean meat movement with a book entitled as such, and describes how growing meat without animals will revolutionize dinner and the world. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David. Great to be chatting with you.
Okay, Paul, let's go way back. For the benefit of the listening audience, can you please take us through the thought process in reframing the consumer and media debate? Before you got involved, animal rights activists were considered radicals that would break the law to cause all sorts of trouble, and animal ag was very successful in positioning them as such, including the media and consumers. What specifically did you do to change the debate, and how did you go about it?
Well, that's kind of you, David. For a long time, I think there were certain misperceptions about the debate regarding what we ought to do with animals. And by that, I mean whether animals exist on this planet for us or with us. Do we think of them as mere commodities who we can use for whatever purposes we want, or do we view them as our fellow creatures on this planet who we owe some amount of respect and compassion to? And when a lot of the times when people learn about this issue, they become very upset. And so you then have one of two things that can happen. You can either have cognitive dissonance and try to, shoot the messenger and say, oh, well, I clearly the message must be wrong because I don't like the messenger. Or you can become persuaded and then become a bad messenger yourself by becoming quite angry or hostile, or in some way ineffective in your own communications about these type of sensitive issues. And I think, that led to some people having a perception of, let's say, vegetarians or vegans as being folks who weren't really like you, right? They weren't the type of person who you would want to hang out with. But as time has gone on, I think more and more people have not only come to find logic in the argument relating to how we ought to treat animals, but they have seen lots of people who they respect who are vegetarian or vegan. Just look at, for example, in New York City, where Eric Adams, the new mayor, not only is a vegan, but actually has written one book in his life, and the entire book is about how stopping eating meat helped to save his life and reverse his diabetes. So I think that overall, our perception of vegans per se has changed, and a large part of that has to do with seeing role models who, frankly, are people who we respect, who are vegan.
When we initially met in the early to mid 2000s, it was an issue of just getting more certified humanely raised or third-party certified products on the shelf, and many animal activists didn't even want those. How were you able to hold a consensus from HSUS to the other animal rights group to cut a deal, so to speak, and break bread with the industry?
Think about yourself. You were one of the very first egg producers in the entire country who came out and said, I want to move away from battery cages. And this was a core part of your business. Probably nearly all of the eggs that you were selling were coming from battery caged hens. And yet, what was it that led you to make that move? And you can answer for yourself, but I would go so far as to say that you found partners, whether at the Humane Society or otherwise, who you thought didn't think poorly of you, who wanted to work with you and wanted to work with you to help to create a better future, and that you could leave a meaningful legacy behind with your business to try to do something good in the world by being a real leader and embracing innovation rather than just clinging on to the status quo.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. We received, as my Southern friends used to say, a lot of encouragement. And speaking of encouragement, what was the criteria as how you chose video exposés of farm conditions, and how did you work it through from the media back to the food service or retail channel?
Well, look, the fact is that we always wanted to work with those in the industry who wanted to embrace innovation and change. And so before I answer your question directly, David, let me just give you a quick analogy. If you go back to the 1990s, you look at the photography market, Kodak and Canon were vying for supremacy. And they both knew about digital film. In fact, Kodak originally invented it, but they perceived it as something that would threaten its core business. They thought it was going to cannibalize its core business, which of course was selling, negatives and the gelatin film and the chemicals for the dark rooms and everything else needed to print photos. And Canon said, yeah, we think that this is going to cannibalize our core business, but we also think it's the way of the future. And so they embraced it. And we all know what happened. In the end, Kodak went bankrupt, and Canon is now the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. And there are some in the egg industry who I always felt were more like the Canon than the Kodak. There were some who were like the Kodak, who had their head in the sand, who wouldn't meet with us, who wouldn't talk with us, who weren't interested in innovation, who just wanted to cling on to the status quo. And they wanted to just say, hey, we've had these birds locked up in cages for decades. We're going to do it in perpetuity going forward. There were others, though, who were like you, who were willing to come and sit down and talk, and willing to try to find some type of common ground, even if it wasn't total common ground, but common ground on anything. And you never really saw those people being subjected to that type of negative attention because they were involved in the process of trying to make some forward progress. And it was really companies that just refused to even have a dialogue that I think ended up doing worse than the companies that were quite interested in sitting down and figuring out ways to move forward and say, hey, look, we may not agree on these issues, but we do agree on these issues, and let's see what we can do. And you're a great example of this, David. I mean, you not only embraced for your own company, but you also got involved legislatively and worked in a number of ways to try to help not just your own company, but the entire egg industry to raise the bar.
Well, as we move forward this here, if you read the book Secret Stories, you'll find Paul Shapiro and his partner in factory farming, and is also now a major alternative protein owner of Eat Just, Josh Bach, in the book, along with Wayne Purcell, Mike McCarrion, and pardon the spelling and expression, Mayan Park. When you go back to the initial meetings we had with discussions also about vegan food, I did not get much pushback when I said the food really doesn't taste that good, especially to palates accustomed to animal-based products. They would need to change to attract those customers. When did you see the light bulb could be turned on that you could be a catalyst for what we have now, the alternate protein revolution acceleration?
Well, that's kind of you, David. So, look, I devoted so much of my life to trying to advance the welfare of animals, especially farm animals. And I really believed that raising awareness and passing laws could be sufficient. I still believe that those are great things to do, don't get me wrong. But when the first cultivated hamburger was served in 2013, this was a real burger, not a plant-based burger. It's a real actual hamburger grown from cattle cells rather than from cattle slaughter. I thought, wow, that is incredible. This could have real potential to just render the conventional way that we produce meat obsolete. And it was very expensive, though. I mean, that burger was over $300,000 to produce. So I still thought of it as an academic pursuit. I was like, well, this might be something for the Jetsons' age, but it's not something for our age, and so we need to keep doing this. But then, toward the very end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, Memphis Meats was founded to commercialize the cultivated meat that had been served a couple years ago. The Good Food Institute was founded, and I started wondering, will food technology do even more than what I had been doing? And I didn't know how I could make a difference in that realm. I didn't know, I'm not a scientist. I didn't have millions of dollars to invest. I didn't have any entrepreneurial background. I had been in the nonprofit world for 2 decades, and didn't really understand how I could make a difference in that space. And so I started really looking at every category of animal exploitation that has ended. And every time that it's ended, for the most part, it's been because of a new technology. It wasn't because of humane sentiment. So for example, we used to light our homes with whale oil. People were very concerned in the 19th century about overhunting whales. And it wasn't concern about the whales that stopped us from whaling and decimated the whaling industry in the United States. It was the invention of kerosene that offered a cheaper and cleaner way to light our homes. We didn't stop whipping horses to get them to carry us around because we thought it was wrong to whip horses. We did it because the internal combustion engine was invented and cars were a better way to transport ourselves than horses. We didn't stop using quill pens, which came from being live plucked from geese. It was a very torturous thing, because we cared about the geese. We stopped because metal fountain pens were invented and it was a better way to write. And so if you look at all of these examples, and there are plenty more, but those are just a few, I started wondering, well, what if these type of alternative proteins, or what we today call alternative proteins, might actually do for animals what these other technologies that I was just referring to have done? And so I thought, well, maybe the best thing I could do would be to write a book about this, because I may not have millions to invest, I may not be a scientist, but I had somewhat of a limited platform and I could write about it. So I pitched a book. Thankfully, Simon & Schuster purchased it and I wrote the book, published it. That book, which is called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World. It did better than anticipated in my view. Like it was reviewed by the Wall Street Journal and NPR, and it made the Washington Post bestseller list. Like I really was pleasantly surprised by its reception. And so then I had a choice. I had to decide, did I want to continue writing about the people who I thought were going to cause this great revolution in how we produce protein, or did I want to just become one of them myself? And I ultimately chose the latter. And so after my book tour, I ended up founding the Better Meat Co. To pursue alternative ways of producing meat experiences without animals. And so my hope is that through my contribution, both as a writer and now as an entrepreneur, that I can help to move this space forward and accelerate the pace of progress toward a future where we aren't as reliant on animals for food as we have been in the past.
Okay, thanks for that. And I'm going to pivot a little bit. As a recurring theme of this podcast is spouses, positive addition to successful incubation acceleration. Paul's wife, Toni Akamoto, who has come out with the Healthy Vegan Cookbook. Would you be so kind to give the great value that Toni has brought to you and the movement?
We don't have enough time, David, on the podcast for me to elaborate the ways that Toni, my wife, has been a great help. But I will say, so she's, I live in her shadow. She's now working on her fourth cookbook. Her first three have done very well. And she's built a really successful business. She started a blog that's called Plant-Based on a Budget. And she basically started it as a way to share recipes with her family and friends that were healthy and cost very little money. Over time, the blog became more and more popular. And when she found herself without a job, she ended up deciding to pursue the blog full time. And she built it up. She never put her own money into it. She never took any investment from anybody else. Just through revenue generation alone, she started this company. And today, she has 6 employees working there. So just through revenue generation alone, no investment. She now has 6 employees. Her books are bestsellers. And it's really an incredible story of entrepreneurial success. And so I'm very inspired by her and what she has accomplished. And she not only makes my life immeasurably better, but she has taught me a lot about business, which is, management is what her degree is in. And she has taught me a lot about a lot of different things and made me both a happier and better person, I would say.
Thanks for that. You're an unusual entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs have a secret sauce and push their products or services until competition develops, and there is a constant state of staying ahead of the competition. Paradoxically, you are consistent in being the biggest cheerleader of all competition for the most part that's driving the alternative protein space. Could you explain why you get so excited about other people's success in an alternative protein? Are you showing your true altruistic animal rights colors, so to speak, or is there something?
I'm honored that you've noticed this, David. I really am. So, look, you're right. I am a cheerleader for this space because I believe it's going to take many oars in the water to get us where we need to go. As an example, if I worked at Impossible Foods, I would also hope that Beyond Meat succeeded. Even though they may appear like they are rivals in the marketplace, I would hope that the other succeeded because I don't think one company alone is going to solve this problem. Now, of course, I have fidelity to my own company, the Better Meat Co., and I think that what we're doing is special and unique. At the same time, I don't think that we can solve this problem on our own. In the same way, it's going to take many different, let's say, put it like this. Imagine if, there was a maker of solar panels who said, I think we're going to be the only solar panel company in the world. Like, that's just not realistic. You need lots of solar panel companies. You're going to need lots of electric car companies. You're going to need lots of wind power companies and so on. And so I truly am rooting for the space, not just my own company. And I regularly introduce other startups to investors, including our own investors. And I am quite happy to do it, honestly. For me, maybe it's because I come out of the nonprofit space, but I can assure you that I am very genuine in my desire to see other companies succeed in helping animals too.
Could you kindly follow up on what you touched on with Clean Meat, as well as the TED Talks have helped with these endeavors?
Yeah, sure. So I have given a number of talks that in many ways have helped to outline a broad worldview that I am espousing and that I hope will be persuasive to others. And that worldview in my writings is basically the following. It would be awesome if, let's say, people if they just wanted to bike and walk rather than drive and fly. But you know what? Most people want to drive and fly. And so we need to find ways to, let's say, make electric cars, to use an example, so we can have cars that don't need fossil fuels and we can reduce the amount of emissions we are putting into the atmosphere. Well, similarly, I would love it if more people would simply eat B&M rice burritos and lentil soup and eat hummus. That would be awesome. I love those foods myself. But people seem to really want meat, and meat demand continues to rise, not fall. As a result, we need to find ways to produce meat that don't involve animals. We need to do that for environmental, animal welfare, and public health reasons. And so whether you like it or not, meat demand is rising, both in the US and around the world. And we need to create meat experiences without animals. It's similar to how, if somebody walks into a room, you flick on a light switch, you're not thinking, I wonder if this light came from coal, or if it came from wind, or if it came from oil, or if it came from solar. You just want the experience of an illuminated room. Well, similarly, when you eat meat, most people aren't thinking, I'm so glad an animal was slaughtered for this. Quite the contrary. If they thought about it, they might actually prefer that an animal not be slaughtered for it. And so you have this phenomenon where I think a lot of people would be quite happy to enjoy meat experiences, even if they didn't involve animals. And so the main argument that I am making through my speeches and my writings and my company is that we need to satiate humanity's meat tooth without animals. And there's lots of different ways to do that. You can go make, plant proteins, animal cell culture, microbial fermentation, and more. But just in the same way, we need to wean humanity off of fossil fuels. We need to wean humanity off of factory farms. And we can do that using food innovation and technology. And that's why I am devoting my life to making this happen.
That's well said. And thanks for sharing that, Paul. Do me a favor and hang on. We have to take a break now. But coming up in the second part of my talk with Paul Shapiro, the author of Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World, Paul shares the mission of the Better Meat Company.
We're a B2B ingredients company, David, so we don't intend to come out with our own brand of products. What we really do is create ingredients that we sell to companies like Purdue Farms, Hormel Foods, and others so that they can make their products better.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book, Principles of Cartel Disruption, Accelerate and Maximize Performance, is now available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.